Hi there, my name is FixFox and welcome to Heroes of Might and Magic 2. This is the FHeroes edition, and today I'm going to be ranking all the creatures tier by tier, tier 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 that you will find in all of the factions of Heroes of Might and Magic 2. Just so we're clear, my general criteria, the things I'm going to be looking at, is going to be things mostly looking at the individual stats, where those creatures fit into their respective faction, whether they cover up some major need or they can be a strategy defining type of unit. And I will try and stay away a little bit from the expensiveness when we're talking about accounting for the buildings and the dwellings themselves and the actual cost per units. Occasionally I will use those criteria as tiebreakers between units. I'll look at things like the growth stat per unit, but in general I'm looking at usefulness, I'm looking at their strategy and things of that nature. So with that being said, please come along with me. It's going to be a little bit of a long video, and I hope that we look at this more in terms of me being thorough and less of me being long-winded. Let's dive right in. Starting off with the tier 1 creatures, it is very important to note that they have a distinctive role on the battlefield. Tier 1 creatures are supposed to be fairly weak, very cost efficient in the sense that they are cheap to build and any troops are better than no troops, but that they don't really hold up against better disciplined or higher tier creatures, with the exception of that they may be amassed into a large group. And it is not uncommon in a very long going game, maybe a 2-3 month playthrough, to end up having hundreds of some of these low level creatures. Not to mention that several of these creatures have dwellings that you can find across the map in some capacity. So, and actually now that I'm looking at this, yes, all 6 of these creatures, you can find a dwelling somewhere on the map to help you boost their numbers and propel them into some sort of relevancy for you and your faction. But again, very weak, and they have limited uses. Let's take a look at them one by one now. Starting off here with the Goblin, Barbarian faction unit. They are a 4-speed creature. They are melee. They will not fly or anything like that special. Their job is to get one good hit off on the enemy and to maybe protect your shooters a little bit. They do not take a hit very well with their only 1 defense, but kind of going along with the Barbarian playstyle with their 3 attack, if you allow a Goblin stack to hit you, you are going to take some damage, and that feels pretty good. With 3 hit points, they are fairly fragile, but again, if they can get the first hit off on you, they're going to do some pretty consistent damage, between 1 to 2 damage. So offhand, I'm going to start off by placing the Goblins kind of into the B tier. We may adjust this later, but for now, they are a good, solid, all-around unit with limited use cases, as we would expect from the first tier Barbarian unit. Now, moving on to the Peasant. We have the worst unit in the game. No one is going to dispute that. Look at their statistics with 1 attack, 1 defense, 1 hit point, 1 damage each. Very slow with 2 movement. Each time that they get the chance to move. They are very difficult to even use. Say that you have archers or rangers, having peasants try to cover for those creatures is about as useful as they are going to be, but even so, there's a good chance that they are not going to do a very effective job of that because they are so darn slow. Perhaps this would be a time where you would best consider using the grouped formation on a hero with your peasants flanking a group of archers or rangers on either side, and that way you can potentially stop some enemy aggression. Otherwise, maybe you just make sure that you break off 1 single peasant and have them be their own stack just so they can get in the way of some other enemies. A very bad unit, and the cost per unit for 20 gold does not make up for the fact that they are just the worst. They are going to be in the C tier. There's nothing else I can really say about the Peasant. Do they have their uses? Well, I mean, you can make a use out of anything, but this is not the time to be trying to be a peasant apologist here in Heroes of Might and Magic 2. So with that, let's move on to the Skeleton. Skeletons are very interesting units. Skeletons have the ability to snowball the game. When we talk about power stacks of creatures, skeletons are one of the creatures that you can get a power stack of. And how do I mean? Well, their stats, if you look at them, are not the most amazing thing you ever saw, but they are better than the Goblin per se. With their 4 attack, they have more attack than the Goblin. Their defense of 3, they can take a little bit of a hit. 4 hit points, they're doing okay there. Their damage from 2 to 3, that's not too bad. That's not too bad. Where you really get the value out of your skeletons, though, is that you can raise them for free with your necromancers with the necromancy skill. With a cost of 75 gold per unit, that is really where you would like to get your power stack of skeletons from, but you can get into a medium or late game scenario with a stack of skeletons that will overwhelm even some early 6-tier creatures that you might get. Say the enemy has 1 week's worth of growth of Cyclops or Phoenixes. Your power stack of skeletons, you can buff them in some meaningful way, and they're going to do something excellent to you. And it doesn't hurt that the necromancers start off with the haste spell that will help you actually do a better job of utilizing the skeletons' unique abilities. So the skeletons, if you are going to go for a stack size, if you're going to really try and make sure that you protect your skeletons, mitigate losses throughout the early game, you can make them a force to be reckoned with. Not every creature in the first tier can potentially make it to your late game army. Necromancers rarely do take the level 2 creature, the zombie or the mutant zombie. Oftentimes you will leave them at home in favor of your stack of skeletons. So for that reason, the skeletons are going to be an S tier creature. So happy with where we're at so far. The stats back that up, the cost backs that up, and then the strategy also backs that up. Let's move on then to the sprite. Sprites are the only flying creature here in the first tier, and that makes them very, very useful. If you are, say, playing through as a knight or a barbarian, and you have the opportunity perhaps to hire a sorceress hero, sometimes you might consider hiring that hero just because you know that they are going to have some sprites, and those sprites can potentially help you take some early game fights against some ranged creatures. Now, they are incredibly fragile. They have 4 attack, 2 defense, but they only got 2 hit points. Compared to the skeletons or the goblins, that's less than all them. It's only a little bit better than the peasant, but I mean, anything is better than a peasant. One of the special things about the sprites, though, is truly that they also play into their faction strength, which is a high-speed hit and run. The sprites do not have any retaliation, so though they are low hit points, they kind of have some inherent, I don't want to say tankiness, but some inherent ability to prevent losses because you are not going to take damage from every single retaliation that you do. 1 to 2 damage, nothing really to write home about, but overall they are a serviceable unit. They can make a huge impact on the battlefield, and is not necessarily uncommon to see you take sprites over the level 2 dwarves if you are a sorcerer's faction. And again, like I said, there are some use cases where other factions can make use of these low level but flying creatures. So for that, I do put the sprites right now into the A tier. They are maybe just bottom of S tier, but for now, for sure, they are definitely in the A tier. And we will, of course, revisit all these decisions shortly. We now move on to the Centaur. The Centaur is a tremendous unit for this reason. They uniquely fit into their faction in a good way. Their defense is 1. Their attack is 3. Their damage is low but moderate. They have a 4 speed. They are the only 2 hex creature. They take up 2 hexes on the battlefield when they are out and about, and that makes them very hard to defend as shooters. It's a little bit more difficult to cover up centaurs than some other ranged creatures, say orcs, say archers, say rangers, and that just means that's just because they have more surface area available for an enemy to sneak through and prevent them from doing full damage from afar. One thing that is important to note is that with 5 hit points, though, any amount of defense that you get on these centaurs, they are going to last much longer. Centaurs are perhaps the only level 1 creature that I wouldn't feel very uncomfortable with taking into a fight against ghosts. I'm not planning on fighting ghosts with centaurs if I can possibly help it, but if you have a hero that's got some good stats, say a knight, and say they have 10, 12 defense, those 5 hit points and the effective tankiness of this unit goes way up. So you got to look at that 5 hit points and say, for a ranged creature, those hit points look pretty okay, and you can augment their capabilities in a nice way. Not to mention, they do fill a good role on the Warlock faction. They are the Warlock's only shooting unit. Warlocks are interesting to me because I will many times end up taking the centaurs over some other creatures, say generally like the griffins. Usually I leave griffins at home personally, but the centaurs often will make it into a late game army unless their forces are decimated. And unfortunately, because they're hard to cover up, because they are a shooter, they do end up getting a lot of attention. So centaurs as a ranged 1 level creature and with the defense, with the 60 cost, I am going to put them into the A tier. I'm going to put them above or below sprites. I'm going to put them below sprites only because I really, there's not anything else. There's no other creature that can fly in the first tier like the sprites can. And that is very, very valuable. So that's going to sneak in right under the sprites. Sprites are going to be the top of A tier right now. And then the centaurs will be just below them. And then we come to our last creature here in the first tier, and that's going to be the halflings. So with 2 attack, 1 defense, 3 hit points, the halflings are fairly weak. What do they have that makes up for that? Well, they do shoot. They are a ranged creature, and in fact, they also, kind of talking about their faction, they fit pretty well with wizards. If you are playing as the wizards and you end up taking halflings along, your late game army might be comprised of the titans, the archmagi, and these halflings, and you can have 3 shooters just out of your faction. So any amount of archery that you can get, any kind of tactics that involve ranged creatures, halflings as a tier 1 creature can still make it into that late game army. The biggest knock against them, I would say though, is their speed. At 3 speed, it's going to be a little bit difficult to use the halflings. Taking them on the road is kind of one of those necessities. And when you're playing as wizards, you don't really feel the cost to your daily movement points with the halflings, because at this point, you're just used to it. You are just used to being a little bit slower than everybody else. But one thing to note here, which is very nifty, is that halflings are actually a good candidate for some certain spells like Bless. With their 1 to 3 damage, if you bless the halflings and they're doing max damage, that is a huge range. You can see on the battlefield, oh, my halflings can do anywhere between 100 to 300 damage. That's a big range. And so good candidate for Bless. And they're generally a creature that you will use as wizards throughout the entire game. So for where they land, I am going to put the halflings definitely above goblins. I'm going to put them below centaurs and below sprites, but solidly in the A tier. And so do I like this list? Do I like where this is going so far? I think I do. I think I'm happy with these choices. Skeletons are going to remain the number 1 based off primarily their stats. Really, when you're looking at the 4 attack, the 3 defense, the 4 hit points, that's a fairly good overall unit. And in fact, I think that some of the power budget for the necromancers really comes out of the tier 2 and the tier 3 creatures for the necromancy faction. But the skeleton does a good job of trying to make up for that kind of weird gap in some of their other tiers of creatures. So I'm happy that skeletons are at the top of S tier. I think I'm happy to see the ranged creatures and the flying creatures in the A tier. Goblins are a cut below that, but still not a terrible unit. And then the peasant is definitely in the C tier. Into the tier 2 creatures, we're starting off with the barbarian orc. They are a ranged creature. They are very slow with only 3 speed. They do a moderate amount of damage. They actually have more defense than they do attack. And with 10 hit points, it's nothing really to write home about, but it gives the early barbarians something that they sorely lack, which is a way to engage with the enemy without taking 2 or 3 turns of combat to get down the battlefield. So they are a very welcome addition to the barbarian army, but overall, they are a little bit of a liability in the sense that their speed is just so slow. They're probably going to go last in every single fight, and the damage that they put out is merely okay. Really, the best thing about both the orc, the barbarians, and the knight rangers is their cost efficiency. These are really 2 of the most cost efficient troops that you're going to find. With the orc, they're great, they're solid. But then you add the upgraded orc with the orc chieftain, and they can absolutely do some wonderful things for the very, very low cost of just an additional, I think, 33 gold more. Overall, this is the first time that we're going to see a discrepancy between the base level creature and the upper tier creature. This is going to be, quite frankly, a B tier creature for the orcs, and then an S tier creature for the orc chiefs. Why? Because the barrier to entry for orc chiefs is so low, and for what they provide for their faction, they are excellent. Compared to some of the other possible tier 2 creatures, they are going to put out good amounts of damage. They're going to be effective, and they're going to fill the gaps that their early game really has a struggle with. So moving on to the archers, they are in the exact same vein as the orcs and the orc chiefs, except I think that in a straight up fight, which would you rather have? Would you rather have a ranger or an orc chief? I think that you would rather have a ranger just because of the double attack, although the orc chiefs are much more, again, cost efficient, whether it's their dwelling or whether it's just the flat cost. But with 5 attack, 3 defense, 10 hit points, 2 to 3 damage, the archer is more offensively geared towards being able to put out damage and support their troops from afar. If you are fighting some Knight faction creatures, a Knight faction hero, you are going to need to account for their rangers, and they will get a considerable stack size. And unless you find a way to somehow cover up those archers or rangers, unless you find some way to mitigate their damage, they are going to take a healthy chunk out of you. You cannot underestimate this ranged creature. Given that they are the only ranged creature for the Knight faction, they will always be in that army. You will essentially, you're always going to consider the archer to be your first level creature, because peasants, you don't really consider them at all. But they are definitely better than any tier 1 creature. Whether it's the archers or the rangers, they are a welcome addition to your army. The archers are going to, for now, make it into the bottom of the A tier, and the ranger is going to make it into S tier. I'm going to have to come back and make my final decision about whether I prefer the rangers or the orc chiefs in the number 1 slot, but for now, suffice to say that they are certainly an S tier creature. Moving on, we are going to be talking about the zombies and the mutant zombies. These creatures, as I've mentioned with the tier 1 creature skeletons, a lot of the power budget for the necromancer seems to have come out of the tier 2 creature and gone into the first tier creature. Zombies are so slow. They have very, very, very low defense with only 2 defense. The 15 hit points or the 20 hit points that you have once you become mutant zombies is just not that favorable. The difference between the regular zombies and the upgraded zombies is 5 hit points and 2 additional speed, going from 2 speed up to 4 speed, and that's a meaningful, worthwhile upgrade, and that is certainly going to separate those creatures. But overall, as far as usefulness in their long-term army, zombies are kind of just there to do the best that they can. Sometimes they feel like they're more of a nuisance. As we mentioned previously, there is the haste spell that comes standard with all necromancers. This is a great unit to get some of that haste with a little bit of love, a little bit of attention. Zombies can do an okay job, but really, until you get the mutant zombie upgrade, you're going to be struggling, and it's going to feel like a wasted unit. The zombie is in the C tier for me, right where the peasants were in the previous deal. And then the mutant zombies as an upgrade is going to be somewhere in the A tier. I'm still going to take archers over zombies, but I do think that mutant zombies as the upgrade does put them into the A tier. Moving on into the dwarfs. So for the sorceress faction, we now have the dwarf. Dwarves are a little bit of a departure from the other troops and philosophy in the sorceress faction. Dwarves are a hardy, stout unit. They are not a hit and run type of unit, whereas pretty much every single other sorceress creature is. Dwarves are going to provide a healthy amount of hit points with 20 hit points each. They are going to have to be accounted for in some way, and sometimes it's easy to underestimate the power of dwarves just because you forget how much hit points you need to chew through. Now back that up with an additional 5 defense. Compare their 20 hit points with 5 defense compared to the 2 defense and the 20 hit points of, say, the mutant zombies. The base level dwarf is nearly, it's more than twice as valuable, those hit points are, in that sense. That's not quite how it works, just because it's more in terms of 5% or 10% of damage being mitigated, and yet there's a lot of extra value you can get out of those hit points, out of those effective hit points. Where do they really fit in the tree for the sorceresses? Where do they fit here amongst all these units? You're not going to want the base level dwarf over a mutant zombie, but you are going to want the battle dwarf over the mutant zombie, I would say personally. And partially that's because they have some late game utility in the sense that they have the ability to potentially resist some spells. So that can always turn a fight on its head. An excellent garrison creature, a creature that you sometimes will leave at home just because you know that the enemy is going to have to find a way to defeat 80 dwarves and spells are not going to be as effective, and that lets your hero be faster while you adventure. They are not a terrible unit. I'm never sad to see dwarves or battle dwarves, but battle dwarves I think are going to go into the A tier just above the mutant zombies, and the dwarf is going to actually go below the orc. Valuing the ranged damage and understanding that the 3 speed it's 2 speed is just not as nearly so valuable. 2 speed up to 4 speed for those battle dwarves up to from dwarves to battle dwarves, huge upgrade. We then come upon 2 of the more unique tier 2 creatures, and that's going to start us off with the gargoyle. Now, the gargoyles are the only flying creature here in the tier 2, and they are really an excellent unit. They will often make it into my final army if I'm playing as warlocks. They fly, and they are a 6-speed creature. Compare that to any of these other creatures that we have on the board so far. They are all average 4-speed creatures. Gargoyles, they fly, and they are a 6-speed creature. They will potentially be what gives warlocks the opportunity to dictate fights early on because of that certain amount of initiative. Now, with 4 attack, they're not going to be carrying fights with their damage, but with 7 defense, once they get onto an enemy, they are pretty darn sticky. And that 7 defense is going to actually help them hold up to the attacks from higher tiered creatures for much of the game, if not most of the game, even though warlocks do not generally spec too much into the defensive side of things. But still, they're going to do a good job of filling their role, which is, again, to get onto some key priority targets and then focus on just being a nuisance, dealing damage where they can, but preventing maybe some enemy shooters from doing their best work. So with the growth, with the cost per unit, with the hit points, these are going to be in the S tier. They simply must be. Would I rather have gargoyles or orcs and rangers? You are able to look at this kind of in this little triangle where ranged troops beat the slow, hardy defensive troops, and then the flying troops beat the ranged troops because they can jump on them very quickly, and then the stout defensive troops beat the fast flying troops. There's this little kind of triangle of balance that you can find here in Heroes of Might and Magic 2. And while the might creatures have pretty much been spoken for, the stout dwarves and the mutant zombies and such, the gargoyles are going to go into the S tier. I'm for now going to put them at the bottom of the S tier. I don't think that cost comparative wise they compare with the orc chiefs and the rangers, but it is very important to note that they are another creature much like the sprites are. Knowing that a warlock hero might start off with some gargoyles, they can potentially be one of those times that you will purchase a hero simply because they are in a hero starting army, because of the niche role that they fill, and they fill that role so very, very well. So they are definitely S tier, but for now I'm putting them under the upgraded tier 2 creature for the knights and the barbarians. Lastly, we do get to focus on another 6-speed creature. This is going to be the boar. As a 2-hex creature, boars are able to kind of go first in most fights, and they do a great job of being very, very flexible. They can either be used to get down the battlefield as quickly as possible, to kind of do what the gargoyles do, just a little bit worse because they don't fly and they can't cover the entire map in one go, and they are bothered by terrain. But they can also be flexibly used to cover up some of your ranged creatures to prevent some other creatures from trying to encumber your ranged creatures, like your magi, like your titans, like your halflings. So the boars are a great unit for that, and at 150 gold they're very, very cheap. They're not incredibly defensive with the 15 hit points and the 4 defense. They're not incredibly offensive with the 5 attack, 2 to 3 damage. Really, you want them for that flexibility. And it's not uncommon to see boars in a strictly wizard factions final army. They do a great job, but they are at points outclassed. As you get into the later games, you will often see them outclassed because their role is not going to be so much to get down the battlefield. It will be to defend for your shooters. And at that point, then the steel golems will do a better job of that. So use cases, but overall a terrific unit. They are going to go, for me, into the very top of A tier. If they were able to get across the battlefield in one go, they would certainly be S tier. As it stands, they are a tremendous unit. I'm never sad to see boars, but this is where that ranking is going to land so far right now. Let's do a little bit of a shuffle just to make sure that everything is correct here. Between the Orc Chiefs and the Rangers, again, it comes down to more the efficiency. Which would I rather have? 10 Rangers or 10 Orc Chiefs? Let's just review the stats one more time very quickly so we can just kind of double check on that. All right, looking at the stats between the Orc Chief and the Rangers, it's pretty clear that there is some discrepancies here. It's going to be 3 attack, 4 defense, 15 hit points, 3 to 4 damage, still a slow speed, but 16 shots. And then that's going to be versus the Rangers with their 5 attack, their 3 defense, 10 hit points. So clearly it's the more defensive ranged troop versus the more offensively balanced ranged troop, especially knowing that Rangers have that double shot. They make excellent use of that 5 attack. So really, which would I rather have? If there's 10 Rangers or 10 Orc Chiefs, I would definitely rather have the 10 Rangers. And really, with the 200 cost per unit of the Ranger versus the 175 of the Orc Chief, I don't think that that is as good of a difference. And so for that reason, I am talking myself into... Oh no, I'm talking myself into putting the Rangers over the Orc Chiefs. Yep, and that's how we're going to do that. I do still plan on leaving these gargoyles here at the bottom of S tier. As far as my A tier goes, boars must be at the very, very top of the A tier. They are just a snub from getting into the S tier. And then it would be, for me, definitely archers and then battle dwarves and then mutant zombies over the then B tier, orcs, dwarves, and zombies. Into the tier 3 creatures, I think I erroneously said in the first tier section that the wolf was the second tier creature from the barbarian. Sometimes my mouth gets moving faster than my mind can think. No, the wolf is a tier 3 creature. They are a 6-speed creature. They've got 6 attack, 2 defense, 20 hit points, 3 to 5 damage. Being that they are very fast, their job is to get across the battlefield as quickly as possible, and they are highly offensively geared. So now we have the goblin who had 3 attack, 1 defense, and now we have the wolf that has 6 attack, 2 defense. That ratio is still the same, and with the low hit points, they are another troop that is not meant to really take damage, but with their double bite attack, if they are given the opportunity to do damage and to deal damage, they will deal a lot of damage. So their overall utility, their overall effectiveness in combat is really highly dependent on how you use them. Coming across lots of wolves as neutral creatures on the battlefield is a very scary thing to deal with because they will be, as a 6-speed creature, generally faster than most of your troops if you don't have the speed to kind of deal with them and maneuver around the battlefield, and they will get the first hit off on you. You will be able to mitigate some of the damage because you will retaliate after their first attack, but then they're going to get that second attack with whatever's left out of that stack of wolves. So wolves cannot be underestimated. Either you can deal with them or not. They're a little bit of a stat check in that sense. Either you have the tools to effectively handle them and they're not a problem, or you do not have the tools to effectively handle them and they will mess you up. That's kind of their double-edged sword with them. Where does that put them on this tier ranking? Compared to their other tier 3 counterparts, again, very offensively minded, not a lot of hit points, but they do a pretty good job with their faction in dealing damage, and they kind of fit with the theme and all that. They are going to be a solid B tier creature for me. They may slip into the bottom of A tier after all this is said and done, but for now, we're going to put them into B tier, top of B tier. Moving on to the pikemen. So we now have the pikemen, the other might-based faction here in the tier 3, and they are primarily a defensive troop. They are the first kind of breakout unit that really specializes in something stats-wise. With 5 attack but 9 defense, pikemen are going to have a high defense. One kind of misnomer, one thing that people usually forget about is they say, well, pikemen are very defensive-minded, and then the 4th level creature for the knight faction, the swordsman and the master swordsman, they are high attack. Yes and no. Really, the swordsmen have just as high of a defense as the pikemen do. They have 9 defense as well. So you don't really get a whole lot of value out of maybe favoring the swordsman in that sense. You just favor the swordsmen because they are more well-rounded. But the pikemen as an early tier creature, knowing again that we are talking about maybe surrounding our S tier, tier 2 creature, surrounding and preventing damage going down onto our big stack of rangers, pikemen can do that. Pikemen can absolutely do that. And while the base level version is only 4 speed with their 3 to 4 damage, their upgraded veteran pikemen have a speed of 5, and that will make them very mobile. So there is going to be certainly a difference between the base level pikeman and the upgraded veteran pikeman, not to mention they get an extra 5 hit points. But for now, I'm going to put the pikeman below the wolf, and I'm going to put the veteran pikeman actually above the wolves. So B tier for the pikemen and A tier for the veteran pikemen. Moving on to the mummy for the necromancy faction. The necromancers have, unfortunately, some limited tactics for the 1st, 2nd, and 3rd tier creatures. How do I mean? You have 3 creatures in a row who are between 2 to 5 movement points, and you only get a 5-speed creature if you upgrade the mummies into the royal mummies. It's a welcome upgrade, but there's a lot that you need to do to get to that upgrade. And all your troops are ground movement melee creatures. You have no ranged troops, you have no flyers, and so you really have some very, very straightforward fights. Either you can beat the enemy or you cannot. Much in the same way that we talked about the stat check being there for the wolves, either you can deal with them or not. Early game undead is kind of similar, unless there's some spells with the necromancers, which can, of course, shake things up. Really, it's very, very straightforward in these fights in a vacuum. Can you beat them or not? 6 attack, 6 defense, 25 hit points, 3 to 4 damage, average speed, pretty good growth, average growth. The mummies are a unit that I always underestimate. Every single time. And I know this, and I see mummies on the map, and I say to myself, I always underestimate them. Make sure I don't do that this time. And inexplicably, I still do. So they have my respect, and I will be putting mummies because they're more well-rounded and they have higher hit points above the wolves. And then as far as the royal mummy upgrade goes, I'm going to put that actually above the veteran pikemen. Again, more based off of their well-roundedness. You can argue that the 9 defense veteran pikeman has a more niche like kind of use case. Is it better to be more well-rounded, or is it better to do one thing very, very well? We'll talk about that when we get into the tier 5 creatures. But for now, I'm going to put kind of this well-rounded good unit above the one unit that excels at one particular thing. So royal mummies are going to go above the veteran pikemen into the A tier. Moving on, we get into the elves for the sorceress creatures. They are a fairly inexpensive unit. You get a whole bunch of them, and the elves start the hit and run tactic trend. Once you are able to get your elves, you're able to take so many more fights than you otherwise would have been able to. They have a double attack right off the gate, just like the upgraded rangers do for the knight faction. But these sorceress elves and the accompanying grand elves have 4 speed for the elves and 6 speed for the grand elves, but they do solid damage with their double attack. Now, will they really hold up under duress? Absolutely not. They're fairly fragile with only 15 hit points and a pretty low defense. But even once you upgrade them, they do get a little bit more tanky. I think you get 1 or 2 additional points of defense over attack when you upgrade elves into grand elves. So let's check that real quick. And as you can see, that is the case. You go from the 3 defense up to the 5 defense, still with the 15 hit points, but really the speed upgrade is what we are going for there. So the grand elves, certainly better. I think the Grand Elves, quite frankly, as far as this tier of units go, I think that they can carry fights in a way that these other creatures that we've talked about so far in this tier cannot. And so for that reason, I'm going to put Grand Elves into the S tier, and then their Elven counterparts, I'm going to put them below Veteran Pikemen. Because of the speed of the Veteran Pikemen and because of the speed of the Royal Mummies, they can still get down the battlefield in a quick enough way that they can overcome these 4-speed elves. They can withstand the damage that elves will do from afar. And then once the mummies and the pikemen get on top of the elves, it's game over. But they still have a solid place in the A tier over the B tier, again, because their usefulness from a ranged fight, from a ranged perspective. So good troop all around. They shouldn't be sad to be at the bottom of A tier, not at all. Moving on to the Griffin. The Griffin is a unit that I must tell you I'm not a big fan of. They are a 2-hex creature. They fly, which is tremendous, and they are generally well-rounded. 6 attack, 6 defense, 25 hit points. That's reminiscent of a mummy, except they also fly. 3 to 5 damage, and they have this special ability where anytime they are attacked, they will retaliate. So they are an excellent unit that you can Stone Skin, Steel Skin, Bloodlust, buff in some other meaningful way so that they can increase the effectiveness of their retaliation abilities. So what gives, Fix Fox? Why don't you like the Griffins? The problem is that, to me, you're going to take them if you have room in your army, but they're usually the first unit out. You're going to keep the Centaurs in my mind because you're going to want to have that ranged creature. You're going to take the Gargoyles because they are a 6-speed creature instead of a 4-speed creature. And then, of course, Minotaurs are going to be better than Griffins in a straight-up fight. And if you're going to be taking Hydras on the road, you're taking the Hydras for a specific reason because of their high hit points and their damage, etc., etc., etc. Griffins are usually the first creature out. They do a good job blocking because they're a 2-speed creature. They fly. 3 flyers for the Warlocks is not a shoddy thing to think about. That they do a good job, and you can really play to those strengths. But overall, unfortunately, they're just kind of that first creature out. Compared to the other 3rd-tier creatures here, though, are they better than Royal Mummies? Yes, they are. Simply because they fly. Are they better than the Veteran Pikemen? Yes. They're not better at defense or any of these other things, but being able to fly puts them in a tier above all of these other tiers of creatures here because they do something that these other tiers of creatures cannot do. Even the Wolf, who is a 6-speed creature, they are still going to be better than the Wolf because they're going to be able to get down the battlefield and disrupt the enemy right off the bat immediately. But they are absolutely not S tier. They are not on the same plane of existence as the Grand Elf, in my humble opinion, because their usefulness wanes. So then moving on to the final unit here in the 3rd tier, this is going to be the Iron Golems. So the Iron Golems are a creature that, much like the Dwarfs for the Sorceresses, are going to be great in a garrison, but you're probably not going to want to take them on the road. 5 attack, 10 defense. 30 hit points. Fix Fox, these are some amazing stats. I agree, these are good stats. Well, what's the problem? The problem is that they are very slow. The 4 to 5 damage is even good, but we're talking about a 2-speed creature here. And unfortunately, even when we're talking about the upgraded version with the Steel Golem, that speed only goes up to 3. You get some additional attack skill when you upgrade from Iron to Steel Golems. You go from 5 attack up to 7, which is always a very confusing upgrade for me. Why is this creature getting additional attack skill plus speed? Wouldn't I prefer to have a 4-speed average speed creature that still does the same damage? Because I don't really get them for the damage, I get them for the tankiness. Well, I guess, I don't know. They're a creature that is a little bit mystifying to me, but overall, as a garrison creature, couldn't ask for more. They do have a special ability where they're going to take some reduced damage from spells, and they are generally all around good. And the way that they are balanced is that they are just so darn slow. It is worth noting, though, that for the upgrade, it is going to cost you some mercury. And I know that we are not taking the building costs into our calculations here as far as where creatures fall on the tier. If we did, the wizard troops would all come down a little bit just because of the costs associated with them. And yet it is worth noting that not always will you be able to afford the upgrade from iron into steel golems. So I'm not, for the first time, going to use the C tier here in this ranking. The iron golems are not a bad unit. They're not a bad unit. They are just very niche in what they do. The steel golems are definitely better than the iron golems, but they're only marginally so, and they will only move, for sure, still in the B tier. Are they better than mummies or worse than mummies? I think that they are worse than mummies, and I think that they are worse than wolves. What wolves do, what mummies do, is just superior, even though in a straight-up fight, steel golems win, of course. But the usefulness on the battlefield, the utility that you get from this creature is what holds it back, and that's because of its speed. And that is a big problem. And so while they are better than pikemen, steel golems are still only middle of the pack on the B tier. So that will just be a little bit of a focus there, that usefulness does matter. So am I happy with this ranking? Grand elves in the S tier, griffins in the A tier, yes, because they fly, and they're useful in that regard. Royal mummies, yeah, they're good, average, all around good unit at a 5 speed. Veteran pikemen, less so than the mummies, but only just. Let me look at that real quick. Let me look at that actually. In a head-to-head comparison, 5 attack, 9 defense, 20 hit points, 5 speed, 3 to 4 damage, 5 growth, versus the Royal Mummy with their 6 attack, 6 defense, 30 hit points, 3 to 4 damage, fast, 4 growth. So the speed is equal, 3 to 4 damage versus the 3 to 4 damage. So damage is equal. Hit points, 20 on the veteran pikemen versus the 30 for the royal mummies. Even though you have less defense, you're still going to be doing pretty good with that. And you have a little bit more attack. The cost per unit, 300 gold for the royal mummies versus 250 for the veteran pikemen. Growth is 4 versus growth is 5. How big of a deal is that? I mean, that's 120 hit points. And that's 120 hit points of growth, worth of growth. In which case, if the hit points, well, and they're cheaper by 50. Yeah, so the cost is actually balanced out completely. And so if you get one additional veteran pikeman, and they're going to do an additional 3 to 4 damage, even at a reduced attack with their +9 defense, I think that you must put the veteran pikeman above the royal mummy. Interesting. I in my heart of hearts, man, maybe again, it's because I always feel like I underestimate the mummies, and so I have to overestimate them now. In a head-to-head comparison, I think that you take the veteran pikeman, and mostly it comes down to that growth. Going from 4 growth to 5 growth, I think that you take the 5 growth unit there because the stats are so similar. So I'm happy in this case, and then I'm happy with where the elves are. Everything else here looks good to me, especially in the B tier. Do I like that the wolves are below the mummies? I don't. I really don't. I am going to put the wolves above the mummies, and that's just because a 6-speed creature, I've got to give them their dues. As a 6-speed creature, wolves I think are better than mummies. Everything else though I like. Okay, and so that will wrap up that. That will wrap up the 3rd tier. Moving into the 4th tier, we have one of my favorite units. I love the ogres and the ogre lords. First off, just thematically, they're these big, hulking, lumbering units that are going to have to be dealt with and reckoned with at some point. They may be slow. They may take some time to get right on top of you, but like any kind of horror flick that the enemy is unrelenting, once they get their hands on you, you're done. That's kind of how they feel like. And it is incidentally one of the absolute best upgrades in the game, going from ogres into ogre lords. Again, we are not taking the cost of the dwellings into consideration when we are ranking these creatures. If we were, we would have to be very, very careful about these ogre lords because the upgraded adobe is pretty darn expensive. But just taking these troops in a vacuum, the ogre, with its 9 attack, 5 defense, 40 hit points, 4 to 6 damage, but also being very slow, is an excellent unit. The biggest thing that holds it back, the thing that gatekeeps it, is its very slow speed. It will eventually get to you. You are going to have to kind of deal with it in some way, shape, or form. But if we are talking, say, sorceresses, and you have your grand elves, your 3rd tier grand elves with their 6 speed, if the ogres never get good morale, the grand elves will be able to shoot these 3 speed ogres down. No doubt. No doubt. With a very slow speed, with going 2 hexes at a time, the problems with the ogres are many in that regard. They fit the barbarian theme in the sense that they have the high attack and the lower defense, but with 40 hit points, there's an awful lot of meat to chew through there. But when you go to the ogre lord upgrade, you go from 40 hit points up to 60. And your speed will double from 2 up to 4. And so you're going to get even better at what you do. And you are going to take away your biggest problem, your speed being that biggest problem that the ogres have. That's going to put the ogres and the ogre lords in different tiers from each other. As a unit, I'm going to put right now the ogres at the top of B tier. It would not hurt my heart to put them at the bottom of A tier, but this is a pretty loaded tier. There's going to be a lot of A tier creatures here in the 4th tier. And so for that reason, I'm going to put ogres conservatively for now into the B tier, and then I'm going to put their ogre lord upgrades into the S tier. Tremendous unit, very, very valuable, and really anchoring the barbarian faction with its wolves that can't really take a hit, its goblins that can't really take a hit, and the meager damage output with the orcs. The ogres are the first unit that is really very excellent, and you can get them fairly early. So ogres are going to be S tier and B tier. We then move on to the swordsmen and the master swordsmen. These creatures are, as I mentioned when talking about the pikemen, well-rounded and better in the sense than pikemen, in that they have just a higher attack skill. Knights in general spec into defense very, very well. You would think that they would have higher hit points then, so that way they could really use those defensive stats that they get from their heroes. That's not really necessarily the case. Note that the pikemen had 9 defense and I think it was 5 attack. The swordsmen have 7 attack here, and I believe that the master swordsmen have higher attack than that. I think that they have 9 and 9. With their 4 to 6 damage, they could potentially be a good unit that you could bless. They're just generally all around average. 4 speed as a swordsman and 5 speed as the master swordsman. They don't do anything necessarily to set themselves apart. They are half the hit points of the ogre lords, really, and they're okay. I mean, they're fine, but they don't do anything special. They don't have any special ability. They're just another unit there on the battlefield. When I see a horde of a 4th level creature, if I see a horde of ogres or ogre lords, I'm a little bit scared. A horde of vampires or vampire lords, I'm a little scared. Same with rocks, same with druids, same with minotaurs. If I see a horde of swordsmen, I'm not very concerned. And that's just because overall their stats are fairly weak. The value is that they are able to get very early. You can get these troops with very, very low costs with the wood and the ore, and that investment is not that high. And yet, that's not enough when you're doing this kind of stricter head-to-head comparison. So the swordsmen, both the master variety and their lower level parts, are going to dip. We're going to have the master swordsmen. I think that they are going to be better than, but only very, very barely, and that's mostly because of their speed. Master swordsmen with their 5 speed are going to be better than the 2 speed ogres for sure. But I think I'm going to take the 2 speed ogres over the regular swordsmen. I think I will, just from a strictly stats-based opinion and usefulness on the battlefield. I think that this is going to be kind of where these creatures flesh out right now. So Moving on to our next creature, this is going to be the vampires. Finally, the necromancers get a great unit. And this is not just a good unit, this is a great unit. We've talked about how the power budget for the faction is mostly put into skeletons, and that is absolutely true. But the 4th, 5th, and 6th tier creatures for the necromancer faction are stupendous. And while the vampires don't look to be anything very special, 8 attack, 6 defense, 30 hit points, they fly, very good, and critically important for a faction that thus far doesn't have any flyers, they are merely good. Pretty good damage, 5 to 7 damage, it's good, but only 3 growth? Oh, that's not very good at all. That's not very good at all. You don't get vampires for the necromancers because you love vampires. You get vampires for the vampire lords. The stats remain basically the same. The hit points do go up. The growth stat is still the same, but now with the vampire lords, when you have the special ability to leech life from your enemies and to revive vampires based off of the damage that they do, all of a sudden you have a game and strategy and faction defining unit. You can take fights with vampire lords that you couldn't take with any other unit. Because of their ability in high numbers to take whatever losses they have and just drain tank right through them, you can do some amazing things with vampire lords. Amazing things. In a head-to-head fight, vampire lords over any other creature on this board. I think you're going to take the vampire lords. You will take 10 vampire lords over 10 ogre lords. Even though ogre lords have higher attack, and the defense, I mean, the defense is about the same anyway. And even though they have 20 extra hit points, you're still going to take the vampire lords. Even though the ogre lords have more growth than the vampire lords, you're still taking the vampire lords. The ability to take damage and then return units to the battlefield is massive. And especially when we're talking about, generally it's somewhere in about the 20 range is where you can take some really crazy fights that you otherwise wouldn't be able to. Once you get into 40, 50, 60 vampire lords, they must be dealt with, and that priority that you must put on those vampire lords, the focus then frees up your other troops to do some crazy stuff. Vampires are terrific. So vampire lords are absolutely going into the S tier, and they are going above the ogre lords, and then the vampires are going into the solid A tier, especially because they fly and especially because of what they do for their faction. Having that vampire is a great unit, but the vampire lord is maybe one of the best upgrades in the entire game. In a vacuum, it's the best upgrade. I've put in previous tier rankings, I've put the orc chiefs and the rangers above vampire lords, but only because of the cost efficiency. As far as an actual game-defining, strategy-defining upgrade, vampire lords may be the best upgrade in the game. Moving on to the druid. For the sorceress faction, they're a good all-around unit. I feel like neither the elves nor the druids and the greater druids really set themselves apart too much. The druids, how do I mean that? I mean that it's almost like when it came to balancing decisions and where should stats be allocated, okay, we're going to have 2 shooters, and that's going to be part of your power. The mid game is going to be yours because you're going to have 2 very excellent ranged troops, and we don't need to make either of them particularly heavy damage focused or anything like that. We don't need it to carry even harder than it would otherwise. Simply having 2 ranged troops in the first 4 tiers is going to be enough for the sorceresses to take some fights that other factions simply cannot. So when we're talking about the 7 attack, the 5 defense, the 25 hit points, the damage is excellent, by the way. 5 to 8 damage, excellent candidate for Bless. You will often see the AI favoring their stack of greater druids over a moderate amount of tier 6 creatures, say 3 phoenixes. I think that the AI will prioritize keeping their about 40 greater druids alive over their phoenix counterparts. And with good reason. The damage output is tremendous. The cost, the growth, it's a good unit. How good of a unit? Well, I'm going to put the greater druid into, right now I'm putting it into the low S tier, but I'm thinking it might fall into the A tier. I know that the druid is bottom of A tier. They're definitely better than the Master Swordsman because of the value that you put on ranged troops. And especially because, again, how they fit in with their faction. I don't know if the Greater Druids are going to stay in the bottom of S tier. We will wait and see. There's some other troops to be had here. So let's move on then to the Minotaurs. Minotaurs, as a 4th tier creature, they are pretty darn good. And they are the first creature that the Warlocks have that actually have an upgrade. All the other first 3 tiers of creatures, there's no upgrade. You get just Centaurs, you get just Gargoyles, you get just Griffins. Minotaurs can be upgraded into Minotaur Kings, and so the upgrade is a little bit expensive, but Minotaurs are one of the best ground troops you can possibly get. 9 attack, 8 defense, so very well rounded, but still like good damage wise, and especially with it being a range of 5 to 10 damage, an excellent candidate for the Bless spell. Going from 4 speed as the base level Minotaur up to a 6 speed Minotaur King, though, is stupendous. When I think about speed, we all know that there is the elite speed. The elite speed bracket is 7 speed. If you have 7 speed, you are one of 2 creatures. You are either a Phoenix or you are a champion, and you are elite. When I think about sports, for example, I think about like the National Basketball Association, and you can be a pretty good player and you may not find yourself in the NBA, but you might be a player that lacks in some areas, but you have one thing that you are elite at. Maybe it's you are an elite shooter, you have elite athleticism, you are Dennis Rodman, and you are an elite rebounder and hustle guy, and you will be in the NBA even if you can't score a single point. Dennis Rodman didn't score points, but he was phenomenal because he was elite at those few things. 6 speed is not that elite level, and yet it does something very, very nifty to a troop. You get this already good Minotaur troop that is a walking menace on the battlefield, and you give him an additional 2 speed. Minotaur Kings are tremendous. And Minotaur Kings are actually, I can tell you right now, they're going to bump the Greater Druids off the S tier. I don't want too many troops up in the S tier, even if they deserve it. I think that you got to be a little bit more exclusive than that. But I cannot in good faith get the Vampire Lords out of S tier, nor the Ogre Lords. And so therefore I must put my Minotaur Kings into the S tier because of their speed, because of their value, because of how good of a troop they are. And then the Greater Druids are going to fall into the A tier. And the Minotaurs are going to fall above the Druids. And so I've mentioned, well, the Druids are better than these B tier creatures because they are ranged and these ones are not. True. And yes, that does kind of come into the calculations here, but I'm not speaking out of the corner of my mouth. I think that the Minotaurs as a base level creature are still that good. We're going to look at the stats in just a second, actually. Let's look at that right now. Minotaurs, 9 attack, 8 defense, 35 hit points, 5 to 10 damage. Druid, 7 attack, 5 defense, 25 hit points, 5 to 8 damage, and 5 speed. The speed is good. The speed is good, but it's not going to be good enough in my opinion. I do think that the Minotaurs, there's things you can do to jump on the units. 3 growth versus 3 growth. Yeah, I think that the Minotaurs are still a better creature, even though they are 1 speed slower, even though they are going to take some damage from afar. The damage range, the attack, the defense, the hit points. Yeah, I think I'm still going to keep the Minotaurs above the Druids. And that's going to take us to our final troop, and that's going to be the Rocks. Now, the Rocks are one of my all-time favorites. It was funny. I was reading somewhere, and it was a very, very old Reddit thread, I think. And someone said, I was today years old when I realized that the wizards are all inspired from J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. And I said to myself, well, yeah, I suppose. And you've got halflings, you've got wizards. Okay. That's pretty on the nose. And then someone pointed out, well, the Rocks are the Eagles. And I thought, okay, that's where it all kind of comes together. There are lots of different fantasy genres that could include halflings and wizards, but really having the Eagles as one of your troops, that actually makes me say, okay, all right, fine. You might be onto something. And I like that. As a creature, the Rocks are solid. They are good all around. They are very, very balanced. but they also have some potential. 7 attack, 7 defense, 40 hit points. That's a lot of hit points. Compared to some of these other creatures we're talking about, that's a lot of hit points. Even though they are a 4-speed creature, being able to fly, they're kind of like the Griffin in the sense that when they get to go, they are going to be a nuisance, but you can get around their speed a little bit if you're trying to defend against them. But the 4 to 8 damage, that's very interesting. A very good candidate for the Bless. And they're going to make pretty good use of the stats that they're given. They provide some much needed air support to the wizard faction. And very interesting is that you can generally get rocks on day one. There's a lot of times where you will not have to get the requirement of the foundry. You can just have your habitat and your pen, and then you can immediately get your rocks, and you can set out with your 4th tier flying creature as wizards day one with your primary hero. And that's going to allow you to take some really interesting, crazy fights. Rocks are a good unit. They're very available. They're very flexible. And flexibility is something that I do value very, very highly. So where do I put the rocks? I'm going to put the rocks above, certainly, swordsmen, above ogres, because again, the flexibility and the speed. Above or below master swordsman? Let's do that comparison very, very quickly. We're talking 7 attack, 9 defense, 30 hit points, 4 to 6 damage, fast, versus 7 attack, 7 defense on the rocks, 40 hit points. So 10 more hit points, a little bit less attack. Well, same attack, a little bit less defense. And then the damage with 4 to 8 is has a potential of being lower, but also the potential of being higher. And the growth stat is 4 Master Swordsmen versus 3 rocks. I think that this is going to be another time where it's fair to say that growth does matter. How much does it matter, though? And the answer is not nearly as much. I would rather trade 1 creature a week at these stats and at this favorable comparison. I would rather trade 1 creature a week and have that creature be able to ignore terrain and to fly across the battlefield in one go when it's their turn, even if as a 4-speed creature they go maybe 1 turn later than those Master Swordsmen. There's some good interactions there. There's some good balance, but I'm going to put the rocks above the Master Swordsman. And maybe, again, that's just because they're one of my favorites. So again, we do not use the C tier. I don't want to put the Swordsman into the C tier. I just think that they are still a B tier creature. They're fine. They're fine. Unfortunately, that's kind of the deal with a lot of the creatures you find from the Knight faction. They're just fine. But let's look at our rankings. Let's see if we like these. Absolutely Vampire Lords. Absolutely Ogre Lords. Absolutely Minotaur Kings. S tier is set. As far as the A tier, I think you have to put the Greater Druids in the top of A tier. Vampires below, yes. Above Minotaurs, sure. And then Druids. Druids or Rocks? If it's a straight up fight, 10 and 10, I think you take the Rocks because they're going to close the gap that quickly, and that flexibility, that utility is going to be better for you. In a 5-on-5 stack, I think that Druids fill their role and they'll do a good job of taking the enemy's attention where they ought to while still balancing out, dealing some kind of damage. If the enemy is devoting troops to stop the Druids from being effective, then they're still doing their job, even if they're not getting off full damage. And yet, I think I would still rather have 10 Rocks than 10 Druids any day of the week. I would rather have 10 Rocks over 10 Druids. And the 40 hit points is partially what does that for me there. So the Rocks are for sure going into A tier. And I think that that's actually going to bump the Druids down into the top of B tier. I like that. I like that a lot. Rather than have a big bulging A tier, I'm going to have kind of a more balanced A and B tier. So that is going to wrap it up for the 4th tier creatures. Going into the tier 5 creatures, we're going to be going backwards. And the reason I want to do that is because I want to make sure that I'm trying to be a little bit fair to the barbarians. I wonder am I ranking barbarians lower simply because they are going first and then they're the measuring stick I'm using everybody else for. We're going to shake things up and we're going to go backwards. We're going to start off with the wizard troops. That is going to be the mage and the archmage. Now, the mage and the archmage is pretty interesting. Let's look at the mage first, and then we're going to look at the upgrade, because a lot of these troops, when we're looking at these upgrades in the upper tiers, are very, very meaningful. For the mage, we're looking at 11 attacks, 7 defense, 30 hit points, 7 to 9 damage. It's a good overall unit. It's certainly better, and it blows any of the 4th tier creature out of the water, in my opinion. It really does. No creature can really hold up to it, especially because even as a ranged troop, they do have the special ability that they have no melee penalty. So you do prevent them from attacking your backline if you, say, get some sprites or some gargoyles or some rocks in the face of these mages. And yet, they are still going to be doing full damage to you. They are a great candidate for anti-magics. They're a great candidate for bless spells or bloodlusts or anything like that. And when we are looking at their upgrade, they get even better. Again, 7 to 9 damage, 5 speed, 11 and 7 and 30, up to 12 attack, 8 defense, 35 hit points, 7 to 9 damage, and then 6 speed with the additional new ability that they will, with a 20% chance, dispel beneficial spells from an enemy. So the attack skill does go up. They do get 5 extra hit points, and they go into a 6 speed creature. Pretty darn big upgrade. The cost, I mean, for 100 gold, I mean, it's costly. But overall, you're always going to take Archmagi when you can, without a doubt. These are really the kind of troop I think about when I think about my 5th level creatures. I want to have Magi in my army as soon as possible. They are going to allow me to take fights I otherwise wouldn't be able to, and they are just a very consistent presence on the battlefield. And they are only trumped, of course, by the 6th level creatures with the Titans. But once you do get Titans, it's funny. The Archmagi generally start to get ignored a little bit, and then they are really allowed to shine. Until you get Titans, they are often going to draw the ire of some of those ranged troops and some of those fast flying creatures. Overall, where do they land on the tier ranking? Well, Magi and Archmagi, for me, for now I'm going to put the Archmagi into the A tier, and I'm going to put the Magi into the A tier. There is a chance that the Archmagi will creep up into the S tier, but for now, as a very conservative guess, we're going to put them currently in the A tier. Moving on to our next creature, this is going to be the Warlocks with their Hydra. Hydras do not have an upgrade. Hydras are a great unit, but they are very, very slow. We've talked several times about units that are maybe the best garrison units in the game. Hydras are the best of the garrison units, the troops that you don't want to take on the road with you because they are so slow. With only 3 speed, Hydras are going to slow you down if they come into your army. But if they're in a garrison, they are definitely better than the iron or steel golems. They are better than the dwarves and the battle dwarves. Worth noting, though, those other 2 creatures do have some magical resistances, which might make them better in some regards. But overall, with 75 hit points, with the decent attack and the good defense, the Hydras are a troop that is not to be ignored. There are several times where if you will have a large stack of Hydras, and you say to yourself, oh, this battle is won, we only have the Hydras to deal with, you will forget, oh, that's right, I have to crowd around the Hydras in order to attack them, and then they will use their adjacent attack and attack everyone in a circle around their 2 hex space. You want to take Hydras down with ranged troops or spells if at all possible, and yet there are times when that is no longer possible, and Hydras will win you that battle, even though they are so slow, because you will have to reckon with them at some point, and when you do, each Hydra will have that 75 hit points, and they're all going to hit you. Not to mention, with 6 to 12 damage, they can do some serious damage. They can absolutely do some serious damage. So, where does that put Hydras? Unfortunately, the speed is going to hold them back. I feel so bad. I don't want to put them into the B tier, but I have to, and that's only because the tier here for the 5th level creatures is pretty stacked. They are going to go into the B tier, even though compared to all the other troops that we've talked about so far in the previous tiers, I would take Hydras over all of them except for things like Vampire Lords, Ogre Lords, and that's probably it. Those 2 creatures I think I would still take over the 5th level Hydras, but it's worth noting that the way that the Warlocks are kind of built, you don't really need to factor in Hydras into your late game plans if you don't want to, because they have some other troops spread about. So not a terrible thing. It's nice to know you have a good insurance policy with this Warlock 5th tier creature, the Hydra, who's currently going to be in B tier. Moving on to the Unicorn. I've had a little bit of a problem with the Unicorns in the past, and I have since changed my ways. There was nothing wrong with them. I needed to do a better job of recognizing what their role was. I had supposed to myself in the past, well, I've got these sprites that do hit and run tactics, and the druids and the elves and the phoenixes, certainly. I would love to have a nice tanky frontline unit for my 5th level creatures to support these sorceress troops, to kind of round out the rough edges and to fill the gaps that are needed to make a nice well-rounded army. And what I've realized is it'd be nice to have a well-rounded army, certainly. Well, then go and make one with other troops from other factions, and just have leadership or medals of valor to make sure that you can mix troops without cost. The sorceresses are hit and run, and the unicorns do that very, very well. With 40 hit points and 9 defense, they can take a hit, certainly. But look at their damage, 7 to 14 damage with 10 attack. Unicorns are an offensive powerhouse. In the same way that wolves have 6 attack and 2 defense, and you really want them to be the aggressors in any fight, you don't want them to take damage, you want them to put damage out, you need to think of unicorns in that same way. But they just happen to also have some pretty darn good defense. It's really the 40 hit points. Comparing the 40 hit points to, say, the 75 of the Hydra, of course, there's no question who's the better defensive tank type unit. But again, it's the damage, the 7 to 14 damage. Unicorns can do some pretty interesting stuff. Not to mention they do have their special ability. They will have an opportunity to blind any creature on the battlefield that can be blinded, not undead creatures or things like that. So knowing that they are high offense and kind of continue to play into the sorceresses deal with being hit and run, where does that land them on the tier ranking? I think that is going to put them below the Hydras, only because the Hydras have a niche that's even better than the Unicorns niche. The Unicorns add to their faction by doing the same thing that everybody else does, just maybe a little bit better, perhaps. And yet, they don't do that nearly so well as the Hydras being the main tank of the Warlock faction. I am going to put the Unicorns below the Hydras. I would much rather have 10 Hydras than 10 Unicorns. Absolutely. Moving on, then, we will go into the Lich. Lich is one of those units where you're going to have to look at the upgrade to really get a full picture of the creature. Note the big thing with the Lich is this: 12 defense. What creatures have 12 defense? We've already mentioned the Hydra. The Hydra had 9 defense. The Unicorn had 9 defense. And now this Lich here has 12 defense? That's incredible. That's a lot of defense. That is the most defense for any ranged creature. And what that's going to do is make them better at dealing with hand-to-hand attacks. So that's going to help them deal with ranged attacks and physical damage. What that's going to not help them with at all is going to be magic damage. With 25 hit points on the base Lich and with 35 hit points on the upgraded Lich, they can deal with any ranged damage or physical damage, but it's the magic damage that they are not able to do much against. The attack skill with the 8 to 10 damage, it's a high, they're in the high band, but you're not going to be getting much bonus damage off of the Lich. And yet, because they have the Poison Cloud ability and they can attack multiple units at the same time, they're going to have some good use cases where they can still have a multiplicative effect with their damage because they are simply attacking multiple creatures with one attack. The issue is that you can also hurt your own creatures. And sometimes you don't have the ability to use your Liches in combat because you would much rather wait and let your creatures take one more major hit from some enemy unit than accidentally blow your own units apart. You may do the damage calculation. In fact, in the most recent playthrough I did, where it was Voyage Home 3, there was 2 instances where the enemy Liches destroyed 4 bone dragons of their own on a secondary or tertiary unit of mine, like a hero that I didn't even care about. And the damage was massive on their end because they unfortunately did not skip the Lich's turn. That kind of a double-edged sword is scary. Availability is probably the best ability. Out of all the things that you can do special and wonderful in this game, being able to consistently output damage is pretty darn valuable. And because you can occasionally hurt your own troops and you might not even attack because of it, that is going to drive the value of the Lich and their Power Lich counterparts way, way down. Let's take a quick look, though, at the stats for the Power Lich as well. Worth noting that the cost goes up by 150 gold per unit with this upgrade. Yikes, that's a big deal. The speed goes from 5 speed up to 6 speed. That's good. The defense goes up even more with 1 additional defense from 12 to 13, and then the hit points go up another 10 hit points from 25 to 35. But overall, how much do I love that upgrade? It's one of my least favorite upgrades, and yet there's some times where it's good. An extra 10 hit points with all that defense. It's good. But best against knights and best against barbarians. Because otherwise, a good lightning bolt is going to take out a whole bunch of your power liches. So where do they fall on the tier ranking list? Definitely below the Magi. I think that liches fall below the Hydras for sure. Do they fall above or below the unicorns? I think that I'm going to put the regular liches above the unicorns for this reason. Where they fit into their faction matters. Because they are the only ranged troop for the undead, because they can be very, very powerful with their multiplicative ability if they're attacking multiple enemies. I think that you have to give liches and power liches the nod. We just also recognize that they cannot be S tier, they cannot be very high A tier or B tier because of the many drawbacks and the difficulty that there is to use the liches. One potential thing that would change all of this is if, like in Heroes of Might and Magic 3, specifically with the Horn of the Abyss, or maybe it's also with the HD version. I don't think it is. I think it's only with Horn of the Abyss. The ability that the Gogs, the level 2 creatures from the Inferno castles, have to attack ground and to attack just this spot on the ground and then attack, in their AoE damage there. That would change everything. But as it stands, this is not Heroes 3, this is Heroes 2. And I think that we have to, with all that being taken into account, put them in the bottom of A tier and the middle of B tier, respectively. So that is the Lich, and now we move on to the Cavalry unit. This is another unit that is pretty important with their upgrade. The base level Cavalry sucks. Not in the sense that it's just terrible all around. Look at the attack. With 10 attack, 9 defense, that holds up. 30 hit points, ouch. Ouch. That hurts my heart. That hurts my soul, because the Cavalry deserves much better than 30 hit points. The upgrade from Cavalries into Champions is good. It does raise your hit points up. But just these base level stats, you're going to get hit at some point. Which is better, attack or defense? And I submit to you that defense is generally better than attack for this reason. Eventually, you will get hit. And when you get hit, you're going to want to mitigate damage. You're going to want to keep troops on the battlefield. Availability is the best ability. And if you're dead, you're not available. Unless you're necromancers. We're getting into the weeds here. Point is that with only 30 hit points, this is where the cracks have really shown with the Knight faction being not nearly so viable as the 4 magic-based factions. How are you a magic-based faction and yet your 5th tier creatures are just so much better than mine all the time? Cavalry units are unfortunately going to go into the C tier, and that hurts my heart. That really hurts my heart, because there's a lot of things I like about them, and they're good for their faction, but head to head, they are just so weak, and they just don't work very well. Now, the nice thing is that when you upgrade your cavalries into champions, you have some new things to take into consideration. The attack and defense stays the same. You mercifully go up to 40 hit points. That puts you on par with the unicorn. The other ranged troops so far that we've talked about, we don't really, it's kind of hard to compare ranged troops hit points to melee troops hit points, but it's not bad. It's pretty okay. It's on par with the troll and the war troll. They both have the 40 hit points, I believe. But what really happens here with the champion is you get yourself into an elite tier. The power liches with their defense, that kind of puts them into an elite tier as far as defense goes. The champions are in an elite tier when it comes to speed, being one of the only 2 7-speed creatures on the map. That has to count for something. That absolutely must count for something. Being able to go first every time, that's huge. And going first gives you the opportunity to use the appropriate spell. It gives you the opportunity to get the first instance of damage off. It lets you dictate the fight in a meaningful way. And that alone makes sure that I cannot in good faith put the champion any lower than A tier. Really. Is it enough to put them into the S tier? Tough to say. Right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to plan on there being at least 1 unit from this ranking into the S tier. I think that it would be wrong to leave no troops into the S tier whatsoever. But for now, I'm going to put the champion into the top of A tier. I'm going to put the champion above the Archmagi. And I don't like that. I can't do that. Nope. I have to. Wow. It's so tough. Oh, that's so tough. 5 to 10 damage, 10 attack skill, 9 defense, 40 hit points. And you're comparing that to the Archmagi that'll do, what is it, 7 to 9 damage, lots of defense, fills a good role on the team. It's tough to say. For now, we're going to keep the champions into the A tier. Let's move on to the trolls and the war trolls. So we have the trolls. They're a good troop. With 10 attack, that is kind of getting them into their own kind of elite range. That's the highest attack, or that's on par with the highest attack out of anybody else here amongst these other troops that we've been talking about. And they are kind of the opposite of the Lich, if you think about it. The Liches, they've got a higher base damage, but lower attack skill, and so the bonus damage isn't going to come through nearly so much. Trolls are going to get lots of bonus damage, and their upgrade is going to take them from 5 to 7 damage up to 7 to 9. So it's going to be a great upgrade to go from trolls up to war trolls, and they're going to have the opportunity to get lots of bonus damage at the cost of being not very defensive to physical damage. With the 40 hit points, though, they're going to take a lightning bolt much better than power liches will, right? Much better than liches will. With 25 hit points to trolls 40, liches to power liches, the same amount of damage from a lightning bolt is not going to bother a troll nearly so much, and yet because their defense is so much lower, hand-to-hand damage is going to do more to a troll. So on a battlefield, you might consider prioritizing where am I going to ignore a unit's natural defenses by just hitting them with some crazy spells. Otherwise, I think that I really, really like the attack damage here, and I like it in conjunction with the Orc Chiefs, because the ultimate end-game strategy for a late-game barbarian army is get across the battlefield as quickly as possible, hit hard, hit fast. Not hit and run in the sense that sorceresses are. Once you're there, you are there to stay, especially because the Ogre Lords are going to be there to stay. But the trolls can do incredible damage from afar. They're pretty darn tanky with their hit points. And actually, the hit points lend themselves better to being combined with the stats of, say, a hero that has 5+ defense anyway. Overall, I definitely like trolls better than I like liches. And I like war trolls better than I like power liches. I can say that for sure. I think that I must say that I like war trolls better than I like magi, just because the stats are going to be better than that. But I don't think that I like trolls better than I like hydras. So with that being said, and with that in mind, we're going to put the war trolls below champions for now, and trolls below hydras. And then let's start at the bottom and work our way up as far as where troops kind of go. Cavalry, yep, Their hit points are just too low for me to feel very comfortable using them. They're going to take damage from shooters from afar. That's going to hurt them a lot. It is worth noting, what is the cavalry's and the champions' big redeeming factor? Well, I'll tell you, it really is their growth. Wait, is it not? Oh my gosh, it's not. For some reason, I thought that their growth was much higher. This is wrong. The wiki, I'm going to have to check this. I'm going to have to check this. I feel like the growth is off here. It indicates that it's 3 for cavalry. It indicates it's 3 for champions. I'm not convinced that that's correct. One sec, let me check that. No, and that is correct. 3 growth is correct. That is still higher than, say, the unicorns. Unicorns have 2 base growth a week. Champions have 3 base plus a well. You're getting 5 champions a week instead of the 4 unicorns per se. And then hydras, of course, are less. I think the hydras are like 2 a week. Yeah, something like that. So the growth still, though, is better. It's noticeably better, and that is what I was remembering. Is the additional 40 hit points that you get from normal growth enough? At 375 gold per cost on the unit, compared to the Magi, who is like in the 600 range. Yeah, 600 for Magi and then 700 for the Arc Magi. Based off of cost, I cannot in good faith put the champion over the Arc Magi. I cannot. It's going to be the Arc Magi that moves into the S tier for me. And I am perfectly fine with someone disagreeing with me. And if you disagree and where you disagree, I want to hear it from you, because I prefer actually for this to generate discussion rather than be, oh, Fix Fox is right about everything. I would much rather have a fun, great, open conversation with folks about it. These are my feelings. These are my thoughts. These are my opinions. And what I'm telling you right now as I look down the camera is persuade me. I am open to being persuaded. I am open to having my mind changed. I'm not going to say, no, you're wrong, and then I'm going to block you because you made me look foolish. I am perfectly fine with being wrong, but make a good argument for me, please. I want to hear your thoughts in the comments. So that is going to bring the Arc Magi up to S tier, the champions at the top of A tier over these other creatures. And I definitely feel fine with that. I think I definitely feel fine with the champions over the War Trolls and the Magi and the Power Liches. I think I'm fine with I'm fine with the Hydras being over these troops. I'm not as sure, though, if the Hydras ought not to be the bottom of A tier. This might be my bias coming out with how much I hate Power Liches as far as the upgrade goes. I'm going to put the Power Liches into B tier, below the Hydras. And the reason is because going from a 750 gold cost unit with the Lich up to 900 per unit for the Power Lich just feels too expensive. It feels too expensive. I mean, think about this. Think about this. For the gold cost, would you rather have 3 Bone Dragons or 5 Power Liches? Both are going to cost 4,500 gold. And when you put it in terms of cost efficiency like that, there's no question which you'd rather have. Of course, there is an exponential factor when it comes to tier 6 creatures versus tier 5 creatures, and I shouldn't really bring that into consideration when looking at my tiers here. And yet, when I'm thinking about cost efficiency, hit points, value, tell you what, with one spell, with a haste, with a teleport, my Hydras instantly become terrific. If you can just mitigate that one weakness. I'm going to put Hydras above Power Liches. I've talked myself into it. And I'm not sure about unicorns. I think I'm comfortable with cavalry being so low, again, because of their low hit points. But unicorns, I think I'm going to, for now, put them above Liches. And above War Trolls. 7 to 14 damage. The damage is so high. They got to be above trolls. Oh, I didn't mention, but trolls do have the ability to regenerate. And that can be useful, but it's not as consistent as I would sometimes like it to be, as far as how I can use it and its value on the battlefield. So I'm going to stick with this. We've made a lot of changes as we've looked over this, and I think that that's actually better. I don't think that we should stick with our tier ranking with our gut reaction initially. I think that we should kind of parse this out a little bit, and I think that I'm most happy with this tier ranking for the tier 5 creatures. So that's where things are going to stay for now for the tier 5 creatures. All right, and here we are onto the final tier of creatures. This is the 6 tier creatures. There are 6 tiers in every faction. This is the best, and they are costly. They are powerful in their own right, and yet they are not all made equally. I have spoken at length, and it's fairly well understood for most players with Heroes Might and Magic 2 that there are differences from the factions in that they are not all meant to be balanced. They're not all meant to be equal. Right. There's a great content creator out there. We all know Seth. Seth has done some amazing videos that are unapologetic, and I appreciate very, very much his humor. And one of the things that he mentioned was he was like talking about the differences between Black Dragons and how Cyclops and Paladins and Crusaders, they are so unbalanced. It's not even funny. So there's only one viable faction, and that is Warlocks because of the Black Dragons. And then if you're unlucky, then maybe the Wizards. And so then there are then 4 unviable factions. And that is not incorrect. There's nothing incorrect about that mindset, and yet it is worth noting that in the lens of noting that there are early game, mid game, and late game factions, and then some factions that will do better on smaller maps, some factions that will do better with limited resources, things of that nature. It's got to be taken into account as far as, okay, so why is there this big discrepancy? Not to mention the fact that Heroes of Might and Magic 2 came out in a time where online competitive play was not really a thing, and so balance wasn't necessarily thought of as a requirement in that regard. Sure, you can do hot seat, player-to-player type stuff like that, but even the internet in 1995, 1996 wasn't really a thing. So I'm just throwing that out there, that when we look at the Titans versus, say, the Cyclops, we are going to notice some differences, and that is going to be reflected here in this tier ranking, because there's no way of getting around the value differences. Even though there may be a good explanation for it, unfortunately, the might-based factions are going to be ranked lower because that's just kind of the way it is, and there's no amount of cost comparison that can matter. One Titan worth 5,000 gold, up against the same number of Cyclops that you can get for that amount of gold at 750 gold per unit. What is that going to be? It's going to be 5. Is that going to be 6? 6 Cyclops or 1 Titan? I'm still taking the 1 Titan. That's just the way it is. So with that being said, let's again go backwards, and we will focus on the Wizards first, and then we will go from there. Huge upgrade, by the way. Huge discrepancy, and for all these, I've put their upgraded stats first, because those are the ones I really care about the most. For 5,000 gold and 2 gems, you get a unit with the Titan that is ranged, has 15 attack and 15 defense and 300 hit points. It's a 6-speed creature. It's going to do massive amounts of damage. You're going to be doing, I think it's between 20 to 30 points of damage, and you got 16 shots. Incredible. Absolutely incredible unit. You are never sad to see this unit on your team ever. It is certainly in the S tier. There's nothing else I need to say about that. What's perhaps more interesting is the conversation about where does the giant fall as far as 6-tier creatures. The unupgraded giant, for its cost, I believe it's 2,000 gold and 1 gem. It's going to absolutely be better than Paladins, Crusaders, or Cyclops. So for now, we're going to put it into the B tier, but I will tell you right now that the might-based 6th level creatures are going to be less than the giant. I don't want to put the giant into the A tier. I think that there are some other creatures that can go into the A tier, but for now, the giant is going to go into the B tier. Moving on then into our Black Dragons. Black Dragons are the most powerful dragon that you can get with the Warlocks. For 4,000 gold and 2 sulfur, you get a 14 attack, 14 defense, 300 hit point behemoth. It does 25 to 50 damage. It is also a 6-speed creature. The growth is pretty low. So you're going to get 3 Titans and you're going to get 3 Black Dragons each week, assuming that you have the well, which you ought to. I didn't mention that with the Titans are immune to certain spells. They are immune to mind-affecting spells, things like Hypnotize, things like Blind, things like Paralyze. A lot of these really valuable disabling spells, they don't even touch the Titans. No spell affects Black Dragons. You can Lightning Bolt a Titan all day, but you cannot touch a Black Dragon with any spells. That is both a gift and a curse. Fix Fox, how do you mean? Well, you can buff your Titans. You can bless them. You can cast Bloodlust on them. You can Stone Skin or Steel Skin them. You can use spells to your advantage with your Titans and your Giants, but you cannot buff your Dragons. The best thing you can do if you are going to be running Dragons is have a hero with high attack and high defense, because in that way you can actually impact the effectiveness of your Dragons. To the same effect, of course, you can with Titans and Giants, but you also have other things you can do. You can also have some magic aptitude to help fights go your way. Where do their units kind of fall into play? Where do they fall? So the Black Dragon and the Titan are going to be 1A and 1B. Do I really know, or do I really care which is going to be number 1? We're going to save that to the very end of this. But for now, we know that it's going to be Black Dragon and Titan. One of those is going to be number 1, and one of those is going to be number 2, but it's going to be close either way. And maybe we're not even going to find a final answer. We will see. As far as the red and the green dragons, though, I will put the green dragons still in the S tier. And for now, I'm going to put the green dragons into the A tier. You would rather have a 200 hit point flying 4-speed dragon over a giant. So that is for sure. But more than that, it's tough to say as far as where they are comparatively linked. So moving on into then the Phoenix. Phoenixes are a very interesting unit. Let's talk about the magic resistance at first. Magic resistance wise, Phoenixes do have some elemental resistances, so they can be affected by mind affecting spells, your major disabling spells like your paralyzes, your blinds, things like that. But you cannot say lightning bolt a Phoenix. You cannot cold ray a Phoenix. You cannot elemental storm a Phoenix. So there are some things you can do with Phoenixes that, sure, dragons do absolutely better, and you can certainly argue that Titans and Giants do better at continuing to go. Where Phoenixes really excel, though, is with their 100 hit points, which is 1/3 of the total amount of hit points that you get for Black Dragons or Titans. You do get the 7-speed. They are the only other 7-speed creature other than the aforementioned champion, and they can use that to great effect with their ability to fly. Now, their damage is also terrific. I think that this might be getting cut off a little bit here, but we're talking 20 to 40 damage. They are, again, ultra fast. I love Phoenixes, and they are incredibly useful. Where do they fall on this tier ranking? Knowing and how they fit in kind of with their faction, they are really the coup de grace. They are what helps the sorceress stand up at all to the warlocks and the wizard factions. And I think that they actually give the sorceresses an edge over the necromancers faction in general, I would say. Where does that place the Phoenix? Well, I definitely think that the Phoenix is above the green dragon. Again, that 7-speed over a 4-speed creature. Even though the dragon has twice as many hit points, I think that the Phoenixes, with their additional growth, they have more growth than any other 6-speed or 6-tier creature, other than the Crusaders and the Paladins and the Cyclops. I think that the Phoenixes are tremendous, and at least in the A tier, below red dragons, but above green dragons. And then bone dragons are a tough one. They're very, very tricky. Thus far, we've had Titans who cost 2 gems. We've had black dragons that cost 2 sulfur. We've had Phoenixes that cost 1 mercury each. Bone dragons cost only 1,500 gold. That's all the gold that they cost. And that It has to be accounted for. They've got more hit points than the Phoenixes. Their attack and their defense, I believe that their attack is actually a little bit higher than the Phoenixes. No, it's not. 12 attack, 10 defense versus 11 attack, 9 defense. So overall, those stats are actually a little bit worse on the Bone Dragon, but their damage is 25 to 45, whereas the Phoenixes is 20 to 40. So then, wow, it says it's all growth 1 then. Huh, never mind. I thought the Phoenixes, for some reason, I thought that they had a higher growth. They do not. All these tier 6 creatures, other than the Crusader and the Cyclops, they all have the same growth of 1 per week, and that can be boosted by the well. My mistake. Let me correct that in real time. But with Bone Dragons, it's very unique in that as the undead, there are certain spells that they are immune to. It's very interesting that so far, all of these troops are immune to certain spells. And Bone Dragons are immune to any of the other spells that undead are immune to. That is all mind-affecting spells, like the Titans. They are immune to, well, I mean, you can't resurrect them or resurrect true them, although you do have the ability to use the Animate Dead spell with them. And they do, of course, fall prey to Holy Word, Holy Shout, which it's not really that big of a deal necessarily, but it could be in the grand scheme of things. But what I'm trying to say is that that level of magic resistance, which is kind of on par with what you would expect out of Titans, I think has to be considered when we talk about, are they better or worse than Phoenixes? They do have more hit points. Their attack and defense is 1 less each, but their base damage from 25 to 45 is a little bit higher. Where does that put them? I think that in the same way that Titans and Black Dragons are 1A, 1B, I think that Bone Dragons and Phoenixes are 1A, 1B, and it depends on which you prefer more. I really do. And I know that that might be a little bit of a cop-out answer to some people, and don't worry, we are going to decide which is better before all is said and done. And it's probably going to come down to how much you value having a 7-speed creature versus having a 4-speed creature. And for that reason, I'm immediately going to put the Phoenixes above, because I think I would always value a 7-speed creature over a 4-speed creature. But I will think on that before we can wrap this tier ranking up. Let's go then on to the Paladins and the Crusaders. So the Paladins and the Crusaders. Crusaders you do get 1 additional Crusader and Paladin every week, as opposed to the other creatures that we've talked about here in the tiers. Their growth is 2 per week, and that's +3 with the well, +2 with the well. That's going to be 4 per week, and that's nowhere near enough. When your damage is 10 to 20, that's not going to help us out. When your hit points are 65, and we were just talking about a Bone Dragon with 150, that's not going to help. Against the undead, Crusaders can be amazing because they're double damage. There are times where you will end up having Crusaders in your final army only because you know you're going to be fighting a lot of undead, and you think you can get kind of cheeky with that double damage. They have the ability to not be cursed. They have 2 swings, and they will do double damage because they have 2 attacks, much like the wolf does. And yet, because they have 65 hit points, they are really hard to use. They are really hard to use. I did a little bit of a test because I was interested. I said to myself, okay, let's take in the battle simulator 1 Warlock hero that has 0 attack and 0 defense. And let's put them up against a Knight who has 1 Crusader. How much attack and how much defense is necessary to make the 1 Crusader as valuable as the 1 Black Dragon? 0 attack, 0 defense versus X amount of attack, X amount of defense. 1 Black Dragon versus 1 Crusader. And the answer was staggering. It's a lot. It's a lot. And I know that when we're talking about cost effectiveness, we're talking about a 4,000 gold creature versus a 1,000 gold creature. And so, maybe we'd be better off trying to do these stats with 4 Crusaders rather than 1 Black Dragon. And yet the answer was somewhere, I think it was like 15 attack and 10 defense is about where we started to break even. And that feels pretty bad. That feels pretty bad. Not to mention the fact that it depends on who gets to go first, and the Black Dragon's going to go faster because the Crusader is, well, I guess it depends on, they're both very fast creatures. It depends on who gets the initiative, but still. So where does that put us here in these rankings, knowing that the Crusaders are inherently weaker than all these other creatures? They are for sure going to go into the B tier. They simply must. Both the Crusaders and the Paladins must go into the B tier. They cannot hold a candle to these other troops. They never can. They never will. Maybe the best comparison that we can make, though, to keep things interesting is to go on to the Cyclops. Now, with their 12 attack, 9 defense, keeping with the general trend that we see with all barbarians, they have a higher attack. They have less defense, so they would prefer to get the initiative. But these Cyclops creatures, they are only a fast creatures. They do not have an upgrade. They are just, what you see is what you get. And they are going to ultimately be a 5-speed creature instead of a 6-speed creature. What do they have to their name? Whereas the Crusaders cannot be cursed and they have a double attack. The Cyclops have the ability to have a double range attack, like a flame breath attack, a 2 hex attack, and they can potentially paralyze. You can, in theory, with the best possible attack, do 24 damage per Cyclops, hit 2 enemy creatures, and paralyze both of them. The likelihood of that is pretty low from happening, but it's possible. It's possible. Worth mentioning, all the dragons minus the bone dragons and the phoenixes do also have that double hex breath attack. So with the 80 hit points, the 12 attack and the 9 defense versus the paladins, the Crusaders, and their 11 attack, 12 defense, and 65 hit points, which would you rather have? 10 to 20 damage versus 12 to 24, a 5-speed creature versus a 6-speed creature. Which do you take? It's tough, and it depends. I think that in this instance, I'm going to go with the Crusader. And the reason is because they do have the double attack, and if they have the 6 speed, they are always going to be able to get that first strike on the Cyclops, unless there's some other shenanigans that go down. And so in a vacuum, the Crusaders are going to be faster. They're going to get the first hit, and when they hit, they're going to hit twice. And they do have less hit points, sure, but their stats overall are still going to make it so they are able to hold up to the Cyclops with 11 attack and 12 defense. The 12 attack is going to be mitigated. There's going to be no bonus damage from the Cyclops, but there is going to be bonus damage from the Crusader. 9 defense on the Cyclops up to the 11 attack. It is what it is. So all in all, I think that I am going to put Cyclops at the very, very bottom, which does hurt my heart. They are a pretty cheap unit to get, especially because you don't actually have to upgrade them. You have to buy the pyramid once, and you don't have to upgrade it. The cathedral, you have to get the cathedral, and that's 20 crystal, 20 wood, 5,000 gold, and then the upgraded version is another 10 wood, another 10 crystal, and another 5,000 gold, whereas the pyramid is 5,000 gold, 20 crystal, 10 ore, something like that, and you only have to do that once. So, lowest barrier to entry, weakest troop. If we're taking cost efficiency into account, I think that you can put the Cyclops above the Giant. If we're taking cost efficiency into the equation, I think the Giants are actually at the bottom, because the Cloud Castle is, what is that? 125,000 gold and 20 gems just to get just Giants. That's a lot for the base building. Not to mention, it's still 2,000 gold for a Giant, where you can basically get 3 Cyclops. 3 Cyclops are better than 1 Giant, I would say. But we're not taking cost efficiency into this calculation. We are simply looking at, if I have 10 of these and 10 of these and 10 of these and 10 of these, which would I rather have? And the answer is I'd much rather have 10 Giants. I just would. Okay. Green Dragons are firmly at the bottom of the A tier. And then the question between the Phoenixes and the Bone Dragons, I think I already answered my question. And because it's a 4-speed creature versus a 7-speed creature, I think I'm going to take the Phoenixes. Worth noting, though, that speed is not everything. You will hear me talk about speed as if it's the most defining feature in a unit, and it is not. There are times where you can get good value by actually being slow, letting the enemy go first. They will sometimes waste spells, right? They will sometimes do things that put themselves in a precarious position, and then you can just kind of play reactive in that sense. There's pluses and minuses with going first and last, but initiative I generally value more, and I think that most people do. But it's especially not nearly as big of a deal when you consider that the 4-speed bone dragons do fly. And so unless they are slowed, they are still going to get across the battlefield entirely. And yet still, I'm going to put the Phoenixes with their 7-speed into the A tier because that puts them in that elite category. It's just not enough to be better than red dragons, black dragons, or titans. So red dragons are below the black dragons and the titans for now. And then between titans and dragons, conventional wisdom says black dragons are better. Why is that? You don't have to use a spell to buff your dragons. That goes out the window. They do have the opportunity to do double damage. Why? Because they have a flame breath attack and they can do double damage. Same goes for the Phoenixes with the bone dragons here, by the way. They can do double damage, and oftentimes they will. So that easy potential helps out a lot. And never having to worry about getting a negative spell cast on you as a dragon, it's tremendous. The only thing that can affect you spell-wise is your enemy's blesses, their bloodlusts, their dragon slayers, things like that. So I think I must put the black dragons above the titans. Worth noting, by the way, since we're here at the end of this tier ranking, wizards are the most expensive faction to upgrade and fully buy out their town. And it's not even close. And part of that is the library. And part of that is because the upgrade from Magi to Archmagi is so expensive. If you look at the cost to get the ivory tower in the first place, and then you have to get the library to get the Archmagi, it's incredibly expensive. Not to mention the difference between the dragon towers 1, 2, and 3 versus the Cloud Castle and the upgraded Cloud Castle. Wizards factions is the most expensive. Titans are a great unit. I don't feel bad about putting them as 1B, but I am going to put them below the Black Dragons just to make sure that there is a definitive best unit in the game. And is the Black Dragon the best unit in the game? No. You didn't see that coming, did you? Is the Black Dragon the best unit in the game? The answer is no. FixFox, what unit is better? I mean, surely it's not like the tier 1 skeleton. Surely it's not who is our number 1 for the tier 2. Surely it's not the Orc Chief or the Ranger. Surely it's not the Ogre Lord or the Vampire Lord. Surely it's not the Gargoyle or the Grand Elf. Surely it's not a Hydra or an Archmagi or a Champion. Who is better than a Black Dragon? Ghosts. Ghosts. I will put ghosts above Black Dragons. Pound for pound, if I would rather have 10 ghosts or 10 Black Dragons, I'm taking 10 Black Dragons. But the ability for ghosts to get out of control, like napalm in the middle of the jungle, is just so high. Just so high. And for that reason, ghosts, with their special ability to incorporate the souls of creatures that they kill and increase their numbers exponentially over time, it's going to have to be ghosts. Ghosts are going to be the number 1 creature overall. But you cannot recruit them unless you find a barrow mound in the game. And so we are, for now, going to crown the Black Dragon king and champion and ruler over all the other faction creatures. But be advised that, in my personal opinion, there is another out there. So I hope that you've enjoyed this tier ranking. I hope that you've enjoyed kind of my thought process as we've gone through this. And again, where you disagree with me, please let me know. I am not here to be right all the time. I'd prefer to have good back and forth with you. Folks, my name is FixFox. Thank you so much for your time. Thank you for your support. Thank you for the feedback. And I look forward to seeing you in the next video, whether it is a playthrough or whether it is another Heroes of Might and Magic 2 kind of dive into what you can find here. So with that being said, take care of you, take care of your family, your loved ones, your friends, whomever there may be out there. And I'll see you around. FixFox out.